On December 7th, 1941, at 7:55 a.m., the USS West Virginia was moored at Battleship Row, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The temperature was 24 degrees Celsius. The morning was clear, perfect, peaceful. A gentle breeze carried the smell of salt and tropical flowers across the harbor. The men of the West Virginia were preparing for a routine Sunday morning. Officers were having breakfast. Sailors were writing letters home. The ship's band was preparing to play for the morning color ceremony at 8 a.m. In the mess hall, deep in the belly of the ship, a 22-year-old mess attendant, third class, was collecting laundry. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, powerfully built, with shoulders like a linebacker. His name was Dorie Miller. He was called Dorie by his shipmates. He had joined the Navy to escape poverty, to send money home to his family in Texas. But the Navy had rules. Black men could not serve in combat roles. They could not operate guns. They could not stand watch on the bridge. They could be cooks, stewards, mess attendants. That was all. Dorie Miller had never fired a weapon in the Navy. He had never been trained on anti-aircraft guns. He had never been allowed to. The doctrine was clear. His place was in the kitchen. He was collecting dirty laundry from officers' quarters when he heard it. A distant rumble, like thunder. But the sky was clear. Then an explosion. The entire ship shuddered. Alarms began screaming. Men were shouting. Doris dropped the laundry and ran toward his battle station. But he never made it, because in the next 60 seconds, his world exploded. A Japanese torpedo, launched from a Nakajima B-5N Kate bomber, slammed into the port side of the West Virginia. The explosion tore a hole 20 feet wide in the ship's hull. Water poured in. The ship began to list. Then another torpedo hit. Then another. 7 torpedoes in total. The West Virginia was dying. Men were trapped below decks. The lights went out. Water was rising. Men were screaming. And Dorie Miller, the mess attendant, who wasn't allowed to fight, made a decision. He wasn't going to cook breakfast. He was going to war. What those Japanese pilots didn't know, what the United States Navy didn't know, was that Dorie Miller had a skill he had learned not in a military school, not in training, but on a farm in Texas. He understood strength. He understood leverage. He understood how to move heavy things. And in the next 2 hours, he would use that skill to save lives, to kill enemies, and to become the first African-American hero of World War II. This is the story of Dorie Miller and the simple, forgotten farm boy strength that made him the most dangerous man at Pearl Harbor. To understand how a mess hall cook could become a warrior, you first have to understand where he came from. Dorie Miller was not born into a world of opportunity. He was born on October 12, 1919, on a small farm outside Waco, Texas. He was the third of 4 sons, born to Connery and Henrietta Miller. They were sharecroppers, working land they didn't own, picking cotton for pennies, living in a wooden shack with no electricity, no running water, dirt floors. Life was hard, brutal, and unfair. This was Jim Crow, Texas. Segregation wasn't just the law. It was enforced with violence. Black children went to separate schools with hand-me-down books, broken desks, and no heat in winter. The school year was shorter because black children were expected to work in the fields during harvest. Black men worked the hardest jobs for the lowest pay. They couldn't vote. They couldn't testify against white people in court. They couldn't look a white person in the eye without risking a beating. And if you complained, if you stepped out of line, if you demanded your rights, you could disappear. You could be lynched. Your body could be found hanging from a tree as a warning to others. This was the world Dorie Miller was born into. His name itself was a mistake. His parents wanted to name him Doris, after his sister, who had died in infancy. The birth certificate clerk assumed it was a girl's name and wrote it down. By the time his parents realized the error, it was too late. The name stuck. Other boys teased him. But Doris learned early not to respond with violence. His father taught him that fighting back, especially against white people, could get you killed. So Doris learned to be quiet, to be respectful, to keep his head down. Doris grew up in the fields. He picked cotton from the time he was 6 years old. His small hands were perfect for reaching into the bowls without damaging the plant. He worked sunup to sundown, dragging a sack that grew heavier with every step. His hands would bleed from the sharp edges of the cotton bolls. His back would ache from bending over for hours. At the end of a 12-hour day, he might pick 100 pounds of cotton. His father could pick 300 pounds. For that, they would earn maybe 50 cents. Total, for the entire family. But his father taught him something important, something that would save his life at Pearl Harbor. Dorie Miller taught his sons that strength wasn't just about muscles. It was about leverage, about knowing how to lift, how to pull, how to use your body efficiently. When you're lifting a 100-pound bale of cotton, you don't just use your arms. You use your legs, your core, your entire body working together. You find the balance point. You find the leverage. Dorie Miller was a powerful man, respected in the community, despite having nothing. He could lift bales of cotton that took 2 men to move. He could pull a plow when the mule was tired. He could work from dawn to dusk without stopping. And he taught his sons the same skills. By the time Doris was a teenager, he was the strongest boy in McLennan County. He was massive, over 6 feet tall, weighing 200 pounds of solid muscle. His shoulders were broad. His hands were like vices. But he was gentle. He didn't fight. He didn't cause trouble. He didn't talk much. He played fullback for the Moore High School football team, the only black high school in Waco. He was known for his power, his ability to break tackles, to carry 3 defenders on his back, to run through walls. The people in Waco called him the Bull. Coaches from white colleges came to watch him play, but they couldn't recruit him. Black players weren't allowed in white colleges. Not in Texas. Not in 1937. But being strong in Jim Crow Texas didn't mean much. It didn't matter how hard you worked, how talented you were. The ceiling was always low. After high school, Doris worked odd jobs. He worked on farms. He worked in factories. He made barely enough to survive. He gave most of his money to his parents. He saw no future. And then, in 1939, he heard about the Navy. The Navy was recruiting. They needed men. They promised steady pay, 3 meals a day, and a chance to see the world. Doris didn't care about seeing the world. He cared about the $21 a month. That was more money than he had ever seen. On September 16, 1939, Doris Miller enlisted in the United States Navy at the recruiting station in Dallas. He was 19 years old. He had never been on a ship. He had never seen the ocean. But he was strong. He was willing. And he believed the Navy would give him a chance. He was wrong. When Doris arrived at boot camp at Naval Training Station Norfolk, Virginia, he learned the rules. The Navy had a policy, established decades earlier, codified in regulations. General Order 99. Black sailors could only serve in the messman branch. They could cook. They could clean. They could serve officers their meals. They could shine shoes and do laundry. They could be stewards, servants, invisible. That was it. No matter how strong you were, no matter how smart you were, no matter how good a sailor you could be. If you were black, you were a steward. The Navy's reasoning was paternalistic and racist. They claimed black men lacked the intelligence for technical roles. They claimed black men couldn't be trusted with weapons. They claimed that white sailors wouldn't follow orders from black petty officers. It was the same logic that kept black men out of combat roles in the Army, that kept them in segregated units, that kept them picking cotton in Texas. Doris was assigned to the USS West Virginia, a Colorado-class battleship, one of the most powerful warships in the Pacific Fleet. She was 624 feet long, displaced 32,000 tons, carried 8 16-inch guns that could fire a shell 24 miles. She was a floating fortress, and Doris's job was to serve breakfast. He was given the rank of mess attendant 3rd class. His pay was $21 a month. His job was to serve food to officers, to clean their quarters, to collect their laundry, to shine their shoes. He was essentially a servant. The irony was not lost on him. He had joined the Navy to escape sharecropping, to escape serving white men. And now he was serving white men again, just on a ship instead of a farm. But Doris didn't complain. He couldn't complain. Complaining got you disciplined, got you demoted, got you discharged. He did his job. He did it well. He was known as a hard worker, respectful, quiet. His officers liked him. They called him Dorie, like he was a pet. His fellow mess attendants respected him. He sent money home to his parents every month. But there was one thing Doris loved that had nothing to do with cooking: boxing. The West Virginia had a robust boxing program. Intership competitions were major events. Sailors from different ships would face off in organized matches. The crew would bet on the fights. The winners would bring glory to their ship. And boxing didn't care about the color of your skin. It cared about whether you could hit and whether you could take a hit. Doris joined the boxing team in 1940. His first fight, he knocked out his opponent in the first round. His second fight, he won by decision. His third fight, another knockout. He fought as a heavyweight. He had every advantage. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall. He had an 80-inch reach. He weighed 200 pounds of pure muscle. But more importantly, he understood leverage. He understood how to use his body weight, how to generate force from his legs, through his core, into his fist, how to move efficiently, to conserve energy, to strike when the moment was right. It was the same skill his father had taught him lifting cotton bales, the same skill he used breaking tackles on the football field. By 1941, Dorie Miller was the West Virginia's heavyweight boxing champion. He had won competitions against boxers from the USS Arizona, the USS Tennessee, the USS Oklahoma. He was undefeated. He was respected by sailors across the fleet, black and white. In the ring, he was an equal. In the ring, he was feared. But when the boxing was over, when he climbed out of the ring and put his uniform back on, he went back to being invisible. He went back to the kitchen. He went back to collecting laundry. He went back to being the mess boy. The Navy saw him as a cook, nothing more. But Doris was learning. He was watching. Every day, as he moved through the ship delivering meals, collecting laundry, he saw the gunners training. He saw them manning the anti-aircraft batteries on the deck. He saw them loading the big Browning .50 caliber guns, aiming at sleeves towed by planes, firing at targets. He wasn't allowed to touch the guns. He wasn't allowed to train. But he watched. He learned the sequence: load the belt, pull the charging handle, aim, fire, clear the jam, reload. He understood the basics. And on the morning of December 7th, 1941, That understanding would save lives. At 7:55 a.m., Doris Miller was on the third deck of the West Virginia, collecting laundry from officers' quarters. It was a routine Sunday morning. The ship was quiet. Most of the crew was still asleep or just waking up, planning to attend church services on shore, to write letters home, to enjoy a day of rest. The ship was moored at Battleship Row, along Ford Island, with the USS Tennessee moored outboard of her. They were sitting ducks. Then Doris heard it. A distant rumble, like thunder. But the sky was clear, bright blue, perfect. He paused, listened. Then an explosion. Not thunder, a bomb. The entire ship shuddered violently. The deck plates buckled beneath his feet. Alarms began screaming. The general quarters alarm, a sound every sailor dreads. Men were shouting, running. Doris dropped the laundry basket and ran toward his assigned battle station in the handling room, deep below the waterline, where ammunition was passed to the 5-inch guns. But he never made it. Because at 7:56 a.m., a Japanese Nakajima B 5NK torpedo bomber, piloted by Lieutenant Minoru Suzuki, dropped a Type 91 aerial torpedo. The torpedo, modified to run in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, traveled 300 meters through the water at 40 knots. It struck the USS West Virginia on the port side, below the waterline, near frame 52. The explosion tore a hole 20 feet wide and 30 feet tall in the ship's hull. The blast wave traveled through the ship at supersonic speed. Men in the lower decks were killed instantly by the overpressure. Water poured in, thousands of gallons per second. The ship began to list to port. Then, at 7:57 a.m., another torpedo hit. Frame 62. Another massive explosion. More water, more death. Then another, and another. 7 torpedoes in total would hit the West Virginia in less than 10 minutes. The ship was dying. Men were trapped below decks in flooded compartments. They were pounding on watertight doors that couldn't be opened without flooding other sections. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a hellish red glow. Water was rising. Men were screaming, trapped, drowning in the dark. The ship was listing 25 degrees to port. Any more, and she would capsize like the Oklahoma was doing just 100 yards away. Doris heard the screaming from below. He made a decision. He didn't go to his battle station. He went toward the screams. He found a group of men trapped in a flooded compartment on the second deck. The watertight door was jammed, warped by the torpedo blast. Water was rising on the other side. He could see men's faces through the small porthole in the door. They were terrified. Doris grabbed the door handle. He planted his feet, the way his father taught him. He pulled. The door didn't move. It was designed to seal under pressure, designed to save the ship even if it meant sacrificing the men inside. Doris pulled harder. He used every ounce of his 200-pound frame. He used his legs, his back, his core. He pulled the way he pulled a plow through hard Texas soil. The door screeched. The metal groaned. It moved an inch, then 2 inches. Water began pouring out through the gap. Doris kept pulling. The door opened. Water rushed out, carrying men with it, gasping, coughing, alive. Doris pulled them out one by one. He counted 6 men, 6 lives saved. He carried them up ladders to the main deck. He didn't stop. He didn't think. He just moved. Then he heard another call. "The captain is hit. We need help on the bridge." Doris ran. He ran up 6 decks to the navigation bridge. His legs burned. His lungs screamed. When he arrived, he saw carnage. The bridge had taken a direct hit from a bomb. Captain Mervyn Bennion, the commanding officer of the West Virginia, was lying on the deck, mortally wounded. Shrapnel from the bomb had torn through his abdomen. He was conscious, but bleeding out. Lieutenant Commander Dorie Johnson was trying to move him. But the captain was a big man, and Johnson couldn't lift him alone. Doris didn't hesitate. He bent down, scooped the captain up in his arms like he was lifting a bale of cotton, and carried him to a safer position. The captain was still trying to give orders, still trying to command his ship, even as he was dying. Doris stayed with him, shielding him with his own body as bombs fell around them. But the captain's wounds were too severe. He would die within the hour. And while Doris was trying to save him, the Japanese were still attacking. Planes were everywhere. The sky was black with them. Dive bombers, torpedo bombers, fighters. They were strafing the harbor, dropping bombs, firing on lifeboats. The West Virginia's anti-aircraft guns were firing back, but they were overwhelmed. And then Doris saw it. An unmanned Browning .50 caliber anti-aircraft. Gun on the signal bridge. The gunner was dead, slumped over the weapon. The gun was still loaded, still functional, and there was no one to fire it. Dorie Miller had never been trained on this weapon. He had never been allowed to. But he had watched. He had learned. And now, the doctrine didn't matter. He ran to the gun. The Browning .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun was a beast. It weighed over 80 pounds. It fired 800 rounds per minute. It kicked like a mule. It required training, strength, and coordination. Doris had none of that training. But he had something else. He had strength. He had leverage. And he had rage. He grabbed the handles. He swung the gun toward the sky. A Japanese Zero was diving toward the ship, its guns blazing. Doris didn't aim carefully. He didn't calculate lead. He just pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. The weapon roared to life. The recoil nearly knocked him backward. But he planted his feet, the same way he planted his feet in the boxing ring, the same way he planted his feet pulling a plow. He held on. The tracers arced into the sky. He watched them. He adjusted. He learned in real time. The Zero pulled up, trailing smoke. He didn't know if he hit it. He didn't care. He swung the gun toward the next plane. Another Zero, strafing the deck. He fired. The gun shook. The barrel glowed. He kept firing. Planes were everywhere. He fired at all of them. A Kate bomber was coming in low, heading for the Arizona. He tracked it. Fired. The plane exploded in mid-air. He had hit it. He knew he had hit it. His shipmates were cheering. They were shouting his name. But Doris didn't hear them. He just kept firing. For 15 minutes, Dorie Miller manned that gun. Alone. Untrained. He fired until the ammunition ran out. He fired until his hands were blistered and bleeding from the hot metal. He fired until the gun was too hot to touch. And when the ammunition was gone, he didn't stop. He ran to another gun. He loaded. He fired again. Lieutenant Frederick White, a white officer who witnessed it, would later say, "Miller was the best gunner on the ship that day, and he had never been trained." When the order came to abandon ship, Doris helped evacuate wounded men. He carried them down to the boats. He went back into the burning ship multiple times to pull out survivors. He was one of the last men to leave the West Virginia. When he finally climbed into a lifeboat, his uniform was soaked in blood, oil, and seawater. His hands were raw. His face was black with smoke. But he was alive, and he had saved lives. He had killed the enemy. He had done what the Navy said he couldn't do. He had fought. But when Dorie Miller reached shore, he didn't receive a hero's welcome. He received an order. Return to duty. The Navy still saw him as a mess attendant. He was reassigned to help with the wounded. He was put back in the kitchen. The Navy didn't acknowledge what he had done. For weeks, The official reports of Pearl Harbor didn't mention his name. They referred to him only as an unnamed Negro mess attendant. The press picked up the story. A black sailor manned a gun at Pearl Harbor, but they didn't know his name. Finally, in March 1942, a black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, launched a campaign. Who is the mystery hero of Pearl Harbor? They demanded the Navy release his name. They demanded recognition. The Navy finally relented. On May 27, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller was awarded the Navy Cross, the third highest decoration in the Navy. It was the first time the Navy Cross had been awarded to an African American. The ceremony was held on the deck of the USS Enterprise. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, personally pinned the medal on Doris's chest. Nimitz said, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made in the Pacific Fleet to a member of his race, and I'm sure that the future will see others similarly honored for brave acts." The press was there. The cameras were there. Doris Miller became the face of black heroism in World War II. His image was on recruiting posters, above and beyond the call of duty. The poster showed Doris manning the gun, the American flag behind him. It was used to recruit black sailors, to show that they could fight, that they could be heroes. But the Navy still didn't change its policy. Black sailors were still restricted to the messman branch. Doris Miller was still a mess attendant. He was promoted to mess attendant first class, then to cook third class. But he was never allowed to train for combat. He was never given a combat role. The Navy had made him a hero, but they still wouldn't let him be a soldier. Doris was sent on a war bond tour. He traveled across the country, speaking to crowds, raising money for the war effort. He spoke at rallies in black communities. He told his story. He inspired thousands of young black men to enlist. But Doris didn't want to be on a tour. He wanted to fight. He requested combat duty. He requested gunnery training. He was denied. In 1943, Doris was assigned to the USS Liscombe Bay, a small escort carrier in the Pacific. The Liscombe Bay was a Casablanca-class carrier, one of 50 built quickly to support the island-hopping campaign. She was small, only 512 feet long. She was slow, barely 19 knots. She had a wooden flight deck, and she was lightly armored. Escort carriers were nicknamed baby flat tops by the crews. They were also called Kaiser coffins, after the shipbuilder Henry Kaiser. They were vulnerable. Everyone knew it, but they were necessary. The Pacific was vast. The Navy needed carriers everywhere. And Doris didn't care about the danger. At least he was back at sea. At least he was in the war. At least he wasn't on a bond tour. The Liscombe Bay was assigned to Task Force 52, supporting the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. On November 20th, 1943, Marines landed on Tarawa and Mackinac atolls. The fighting was brutal. The casualties were staggering. But the islands were taken. The Liscombe Bay provided air support, her planes strafing Japanese positions, dropping bombs, protecting the troops below. On the night of November 23rd, the task force was steaming in formation northeast of Makin. The Liscombe Bay was in the center of the formation, protected by destroyers. Or so they thought. What they didn't know was that a Japanese submarine, the I-175, commanded by Commander Sunao Tabata, had been stalking them for hours. Tabata was patient. He waited for the perfect moment, for the perfect shot. On November 24th, 1943, at 5:10 a.m., the Liscombe Bay was at general quarters. Dawn was the most dangerous time. That's when submarines attacked. Men were at their stations. Doris was in the mess hall, preparing breakfast. He was making coffee, frying bacon, preparing to feed 900 men. It was his job. It was what the Navy allowed him to do. And then Commander Tabata fired a single Type 95 torpedo. The torpedo traveled through the dark water at 51 knots. It hit the Liscombe Bay directly amidships, on the starboard side, right at the bomb magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. The torpedo detonated the magazine, which contained bombs, torpedoes, and aviation fuel. The blast was so powerful, it lifted the 10,000-ton carrier out of the water. The entire midsection of the ship was engulfed in fire. The flight deck buckled and collapsed. Men were incinerated instantly by the fireball. The temperature at the center of the explosion reached 3,000 degrees. Others were blown into the sea by the force of the blast. The ship's structure was shattered. She began to sink immediately. The stern rose up out of the water. Men were sliding down the deck into the flames. Doris Miller was in the mess hall when the torpedo hit. The explosion threw him across the compartment. The bulkheads collapsed. The ceiling fell in. Fire spread instantly, fed by cooking oil and wooden furniture. But Doris was alive. He could move. He could see men trapped, wounded, burning. He didn't run for the lifeboats. He ran toward them. Survivors reported seeing Doris carrying wounded men up to the main deck. He was covered in oil. His uniform was burning, but he kept moving. He carried men one by one, throwing them over the side into the water where they had a chance. He went back down into the fire multiple times. Men were screaming at him to save himself. He ignored them. He had done this before, at Pearl Harbor. He had saved lives then. He would save lives now. But the ship was sinking fast. The Liscombe Bay went down in less than 23 minutes. One of the fastest sinkings of a large ship in naval history. Men were trapped below decks. Men were in the water, covered in burning oil. Sharks were already circling, attracted by the blood and the explosions. Of the 918 men aboard, 646 were killed. It was one of the worst naval disasters of the war. More men died on the Liscombe Bay than on any other escort carrier. Doris Miller was last seen by Seaman Second Class James Mapp, a fellow black sailor, helping wounded men to the lifeboats. Mapp called out to him, "Dorie, we have to go. She's going down." Doris looked at him. He was calm. He was covered in blood, but not his own. He said, "I got two more." He turned and ran back into the fire. He was never seen again. His body was never recovered. He was declared missing in action. Later, he was declared killed in action. He was 24 years old. The news of Doris Miller's death hit the black community like a bomb. He was a hero. He was a symbol. And now he was gone. The Navy named a destroyer escort after him, the USS Miller, launched in 1973. It was the first ship named after a black sailor. But for decades, Doris Miller's story was forgotten by mainstream America. He was a footnote in history books, a single paragraph about the Negro mess attendant who fought at Pearl Harbor. But in black communities, his story was told and retold. He was a hero. He was proof that black men could fight, could lead, could sacrifice. In 2020, nearly 80 years after Pearl Harbor, the Navy announced it would name a new aircraft carrier after Doris Miller, the USS Doris Miller, CVN-81. It will be a Ford-class carrier, one of the most advanced warships in the world. It will carry the name of a man who was never allowed to serve in combat, a man who was told his place was in the kitchen, a man who proved them wrong. This is the ripple effect. This is the piano wire that changed history. Doris Miller's actions at Pearl Harbor didn't just save lives. They broke barriers. They forced the Navy to confront its own racism. In 1942, the Navy began allowing black sailors to serve in more roles. Not combat roles yet, but more than just cooking. By 1944, under pressure from civil rights leaders and the public, the Navy began desegregating. The first black officers were commissioned. The first black sailors were allowed to man guns, to serve in combat roles. By 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the entire military. It was a slow process. It took years, but it started with men like Doris Miller, men who refused to accept the limitations placed on them, men who fought when they were told they couldn't. That's how wars are truly won. Not by grand strategies or superior weapons, but by individuals who see the flaw in the system and break through it. James McKenna, the mechanic, saw a flaw in the P-38's control cables. He saw 3/8 of an inch of slack that meant death, and he fixed it with a piece of piano wire. Simo Haiha, the farmer, saw a flaw in the sniper doctrine. He saw that a scope glinted in the snow, and he fixed it by using iron sights and the cold itself. Joe Foss, the farm boy, saw a flaw in the dogfighting doctrine. He saw that you couldn't outturn a zero, but you could outthink it with deflection shooting. Vasily Zaitsev, the shepherd, saw a flaw in modern warfare. He saw that breath control and stillness could defeat technology. Alvin York, the turkey hunter, saw a flaw in the way men fought. He saw that machine gunners, like turkeys, could be picked off from the back without the others noticing. And Dorie Miller, the mess attendant, saw a flaw in the system itself. He saw that the doctrine that said black men couldn't fight was a lie, and he proved it, not with words, not with protests, but with action. He grabbed a gun he had never trained on and became the most dangerous man at Pearl Harbor. These are the forgotten pages, the stories of men who didn't follow the manual, who trusted their instincts, who brought their own skills, their own strength, their own courage into the war. Dorie Miller died in 1943, but the lesson he taught lives on. In every military in the world, leaders are taught the same thing. Courage has no color. Heroism doesn't follow a manual. And sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in your arsenal is the person you've been overlooking, the person you've been underestimating, the person you told couldn't fight. They don't always say his name, but every time the Navy commissions a ship, every time a black officer takes command, every time a sailor defies expectations and does the impossible, they're honoring Dorie Miller, the mess hall cook who became a warrior, the sharecropper's son who became a hero, the man who proved that strength isn't just about muscles. It's about courage. It's about refusing to accept limitations. It's about standing up when everyone tells you to stay down. Dorie Miller's story isn't just about Pearl Harbor. It's about every person who has ever been told they're not good enough, not strong enough, not the right color, not the right gender, not the right background. And it's about what happens when those people refuse to believe it, when they grab the gun, when they man the station, when they save the lives, when they prove the world wrong. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the world wars. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.